I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would tell her story to the internet. But here I am sitting on the floor of my apartment at 2:17 in the morning with a half-drunk glass of wine and a pit in my stomach that won't go away. I keep rereading old messages, half hoping they'll change if I stare long enough. They don't. They never do. If you had asked me a year ago what I thought of women who stay with cheating partners, I'd have told you they were weak. That I'd never be one of them. That if someone betrayed me like that, I'd leave without hesitation, dignity intact. But that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't hit you all at once like a clean break. It seeps in quietly, twisting itself around your memories until you can't tell which parts of your life are still real and which ones have been rewritten. His name is Daniel. He's 34. We met 5 years ago in line at a bookstore. He was the one who struck up the conversation, said he'd noticed I was holding the same Murakami novel he'd just finished, and that he couldn't stop thinking about one line from it. "What happens when people open their hearts?" I laughed, told him the rest of the quote. "They get better." We both smiled like idiots, standing there holding our paperbacks and coffee cups, and by the end of that afternoon, I'd given him my number. When I think about that now, I still feel a mix of warmth and nausea. That's how love feels after it breaks, sweet and sick at the same time. Daniel was kind in all the ways that make you fall too quickly. He remembered small things, how I liked my tea, the fact that I hummed when I was nervous, the way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was about to lie. He made me feel like I was being seen for the first time. And I think that's why it hurts so much now, because the same person who made me feel so known is the one who made me question if I ever knew anything at all. I found out about the affair 3 months ago. It wasn't dramatic. No lipstick on the collar, no whispered phone calls I accidentally overheard. It was an email. A stupid, thoughtless email that popped up on our shared tablet while he was in the shower. The subject line said, "Last night." That's all it took. My hand hovered over the screen, my heart already knowing what my mind didn't want to see. I opened it. Her name was Alyssa. She worked with him. The email wasn't long, just a few lines about how she couldn't stop thinking about him, about what they'd done, about how she missed the way he looked at her. My body went cold before I even reached the end. It's strange, the way the world can stay so still while yours collapses. The faucet was still running. The light from the bathroom spilled across the hallway like nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. When he came out, wrapped in a towel, humming some stupid tune, I was just sitting there with the tablet in my lap. I don't even remember what I said, something like, "Who's Alyssa?" But quieter, almost as if I was afraid of the answer. His face changed instantly. Guilt has a way of showing itself before words do. What followed wasn't explosive. I didn't throw anything, didn't scream. We talked, or tried to. He cried. He swore it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, that it didn't mean anything. But the part that stuck with me, the part I still can't let go of, was when he said, "You don't understand, it just happened." As if love, the thing we built, the life we shared, could be undone by something that just happened. I didn't leave that night. I wish I had. I wish I could say I packed a bag, walked out, and never looked back. But instead, I stayed. I stayed because love doesn't switch off when trust does. I stayed because part of me wanted to believe him, to fix it, to make it mean less than it did. The weeks after were a blur of half-hearted apologies and awkward silences. He deleted her number, promised he'd cut all contact, said he'd do anything to earn my trust again. We went to couples therapy. I went through his phone like a detective. We slept in the same bed but felt miles apart. And still, in quiet moments, I'd picture them together. The smell of her perfume on his skin, the way he might have looked at her. I started comparing myself to a woman I'd never met. Her hair was darker. Her smile in her LinkedIn photo was easy, unbothered. I hated her and envied her all at once. Sometimes I think the affair itself was what broke me. It was what came after. The way I stopped recognizing myself. The way I started apologizing for things I hadn't done, trying to be softer, prettier, more forgiving, trying to prove I was worth staying for. Then, 2 weeks ago, I found out he'd seen her again. Not physically, at least that's what he says, but they'd talked. Closure, he called it. I think it was more than that, but I don't even have the energy to find proof anymore. I just remember sitting there numb as he said, "It wasn't about you." But that's the thing, isn't it? It's always about you. You're the one who picks up the pieces, who questions every memory, who wonders if every "I love you" had someone else's name hidden underneath. You're the one who carries the aftermath. Tonight, I packed a bag. It's sitting by the door. He's asleep in the bedroom, snoring softly like everything's fine. And maybe that's what makes this moment feel like both a tragedy and a release. The realization that I don't have to stay broken just because he's comfortable pretending nothing's wrong. I don't know where I'll go yet. Maybe a friend's couch. Maybe nowhere. Maybe I'll just drive until the city disappears in the rearview mirror. But I know this much. I'm done being the forgiving one. I'm done waiting for someone else to decide when I'm allowed to heal. I didn't plan it out. I didn't make a list or write a note or even check the weather. I just woke up before dawn, the city still asleep outside the window, and knew I couldn't breathe in that apartment anymore. His arm was draped across me like it always was, heavy and familiar, and for the first time I didn't feel comfort in it, only weight. I slid out from under it quietly, got dressed in the dark, and took my bag from beside the door. I hesitated for 1 second, looking at the coffee mug he always left in the sink, the shoes he never put away, the faint smell of his cologne on the couch. It should have been harder to walk away. Maybe that's what surprised me most, that leaving someone you once built a life around can be so quiet. The city felt different that morning. Colder, emptier, but somehow also alive in a way I hadn't noticed before. I drove until the skyline turned into suburbs, and the suburbs turned into highway. I stopped at a gas station 2 hours out, bought a coffee that tasted like burnt plastic, and sat in the car until the sun came up. That's when I cried. Not the kind of crying that feels cinematic, but the ugly, body-shaking kind. Years of small silences, half-truths, and swallowed anger came out all at once. It felt like grief, because that's what it was. People don't talk enough about how leaving isn't the end. It's another kind of loss. I called my friend Lauren. She didn't ask why I was calling so early, didn't ask if I was okay. She just said, "Come here," and texted me her address. Lauren and I met in college. We hadn't talked as much in the last few years, life, relationships, the usual drift, but she was the first person I thought of. When I got to her apartment, she opened the door with that look that said she already knew. I didn't even have to explain. I just fell into her arms. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say, "You'll be fine." She just let me exist, broken, quiet, and trying to piece myself together. For the first few days, I felt like a ghost in my own life. I'd wake up on her couch, check my phone out of habit, half expecting a message from him. There were a few at first, the predictable ones. "Where are you? Can we talk? Please don't do this." Then silence. I deleted his number. I thought it would feel empowering, but instead, it just felt empty, like erasing evidence of something that had once been real. Lauren made me eat, made me go outside, made me laugh even when it hurt. We sat on her tiny balcony at night, wrapped in blankets, watching people's windows flicker across the street. "You'll feel like yourself again," she told me once. "Not tomorrow, but eventually." Eventually, that word became a kind of mantra. I started freelancing again, writing copy for small businesses, editing articles for people I'd met years ago. It felt strange to care about work when my life felt like it had been reduced to debris, but there was comfort in routine. Some days, I'd go to a cafe downtown just to be around other people. I'd sit there with my laptop and watch strangers, couples talking quietly, friends arguing about nothing, someone reading alone by the window. I'd forgotten how much beauty there is in ordinary life. 3 weeks after leaving, he sent me an email. It wasn't long, just said, "I miss you, I'm sorry, please come home." I stared at it for a long time. My hands even hovered over the keyboard, ready to reply, ready to fall back into the comfort of familiarity. But then I thought about how I felt that morning. The silence, the weight, the way I'd stopped recognizing my own reflection. And I closed the laptop. That night, I dreamed of him. We were back in the bookstore where we first met, both holding the same Murakami novel. But when he looked at me this time, his face blurred, shifting into someone else's, not Alyssa. but something empty, faceless. I woke up crying. Healing isn't linear. Some days I felt like I was moving forward, like maybe, just maybe, I was okay. Then something small would undo me, a song, a smell, a stranger wearing his kind of jacket. I learned not to fight it. Grief comes in waves, you don't have to swim against them. By the second month, I realized I didn't want to be the woman defined by betrayal anymore. I was tired of telling my story only in the context of his mistakes. I wanted to remember who I was before all of it. I started painting again. Nothing serious, just smudges of color on cheap canvas. It wasn't about making something beautiful. It was about letting my hands move without thinking, about watching shapes take form where there used to be nothing. One afternoon, I took my paints to the park. It was spring, and the city was buzzing again, children playing, dogs barking, someone playing guitar nearby. I felt lighter, almost invisible in the best way. A man sat on the bench next to me, sketching in a notebook. We didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "You use a lot of blue." I looked at my canvas. He was right, blue everywhere, different shades layered together. "It's my favorite color," I said. He smiled. "Mine too. It's the saddest but also the most honest." We talked for a bit about art, music, the way certain colors feel like emotions. His name was Adam. He had kind eyes and a laugh that came easily. When he left, he said, "Maybe I'll see you here again." I didn't think much of it then, but later that night, lying in bed, I realized it was the first conversation I'd had with a man that didn't feel heavy. There was no pressure, no expectation, just presence. Over the next few weeks, we kept running into each other at the park. He'd sketch, I'd paint, and we'd talk about nothing, which somehow felt like everything. He never asked about my past, and I never offered it. There was peace in that. Still, part of me was afraid. I didn't trust my judgment anymore. Every smile felt like a potential risk. Every kindness felt temporary. But I also knew that closing myself off completely would be another kind of loss. So one day, when he asked if I wanted to get coffee, I said yes. It wasn't a date, not really, just two people trying to find warmth in the same city. But when we sat across from each other, hands wrapped around mugs, and he said something that made me laugh, really laugh, I realized how long it had been since I'd felt that way. It wasn't love, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was something like life coming back. Adam and I didn't rush anything. There were no grand gestures, no endless texting, no fireworks. It was slower than that, hesitant, almost fragile. We'd meet for coffee once a week, then sometimes twice, then more. He'd tell me about his work. He was a freelance illustrator, mostly children's books and small commissions. I told him bits about my writing, about the kind of art I did when I couldn't sleep. He listened the way Daniel never did, not just to respond, but to understand. When I spoke, he didn't fill the silence with solutions or apologies that weren't his to give. He just let things be what they were. The first time he came over to Lauren's place, I almost backed out. I'd cleaned the apartment twice, overthinking everything, the lighting, the smell, even which playlist to put on. It wasn't that I wanted to impress him, I just didn't want to mess it up. But when he arrived, it was easy again. He sat on the couch, noticed a canvas leaning against the wall, and asked, "Is this yours?" I nodded. It was one I'd painted early after leaving Daniel, chaotic, messy, blue upon blue upon blue. He said, "It feels like sadness learning how to breathe." I laughed because that was exactly it. We ordered takeout and talked until after midnight. At one point, I realized I hadn't checked my phone in hours. That used to be unthinkable. Still, I was cautious. When he reached for my hand, I hesitated, not because I didn't want to hold it, but because I was afraid of what holding it might mean. I was afraid of trusting another person with something that had already been broken once. He noticed. He didn't push, just smiled, leaned back, and said softly, "We can go as slow as you need." And for once, someone meant it. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I started feeling pieces of myself return. I got my own apartment, small, light-filled, with a balcony overlooking the street. I bought plants. I painted the walls white. It was the first space in years that was entirely mine. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing for no reason, reaching for someone who wasn't there. The ghost of old habits. The body remembers even what the mind has forgiven. I told Adam about the affair eventually. Not everything, not the exact words, not the nights of crying on the bathroom floor, but enough. Enough for him to understand why I sometimes flinched when someone raised their voice, or why I double-checked my messages, or why I still sometimes dreamed of blue. He didn't say the usual things, no, he didn't deserve you, no, you're stronger than that. He just said, that must have hurt a lot. It sounds small, but it was everything. We didn't talk about love, we didn't define anything. We just kept showing up for each other in the quiet ways that matter. He'd bring me coffee on days when deadlines piled up. I'd leave notes in his sketchbook, small things like, you make the world softer. But healing has a way of testing you, even when you think you're past the worst of it. One night, almost a year after I left Daniel, I saw him again. I was walking home from a late dinner with Lauren when I caught a glimpse of someone familiar outside a restaurant. It took me a second to recognize him, the hair shorter, a little more gray, but still him. He saw me too. For a moment, the air just stopped. He smiled, hesitant. Hey. Hey, I said back, my voice steadier than I expected. He asked how I was. I said I was good. He nodded, said he was glad. Then he told me he was engaged. The words didn't sting the way I thought they might. Instead, they just settled somewhere deep and quiet, like the final note of a song you'd already stopped listening to. We talked for a few minutes, about work, about mutual friends, all the meaningless filler people use when they've shared too much history to say anything real. When we said goodbye, he looked at me for a second longer than necessary. I knew what he was thinking, that strange mix of nostalgia and guilt that never quite disappears. Walking home, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry, just still. That night, I told Adam about it. He didn't get jealous or defensive. He just listened, then said, sometimes closure doesn't come from words. Sometimes it's just the moment you realize you don't need it anymore. I think he was right. After that, something in me shifted. I started seeing life less like a wound to heal from, and more like a canvas, full of layers, mistakes, corrections, and color. I wasn't the same woman who had walked away from Daniel in the dark. I wasn't even the woman who'd sat crying at that gas station. I was someone new, someone who'd finally learned how to stand still without waiting for the next heartbreak to define her. A year and a half later, Adam and I moved in together. It wasn't perfect, we argued, sometimes over nothing. There were moments when I'd pull away without realizing it, or when fear would creep in out of nowhere. But love, I learned, isn't about avoiding pain. It's about what you do when it shows up. One evening, after a long day, we sat on the balcony, city lights flickering below us. He was sketching. I was painting. There was music playing softly in the background, something slow, tender. He looked at me and said, "You don't use as much blue anymore." I smiled. "No," I said, "I think I ran out." He laughed, but I think we both understood what that meant. I still think about Daniel sometimes, though not with anger or longing. More like you'd think of an old photograph, a life you once lived, a version of yourself you no longer are. And in a strange way, I'm grateful. Not for the betrayal, but for what came after, for the breaking, the leaving, the slow rebuilding. Because without it, I might never have learned that love isn't something someone gives you. It's something you learn to give yourself first. And once you do, everything else becomes lighter. Years later, when I think about that night on the balcony, it feels like the last page of one book quietly giving way to another. Life didn't explode into some cinematic happiness after that. It just softened, piece by piece, into something gentler. There were seasons where things were easy, and others where they were. There were mornings when Adam made coffee before I woke up, and nights when we argued about small things that didn't really matter but still hurt anyway. That's the thing about love. It doesn't erase your scars. It just gives them somewhere to rest. By the time I turned 32, I had a small art studio downtown. I'd started selling my work, pieces that were lighter, brighter, full of texture and movement. People would ask what inspired them, and I never knew how to answer honestly without unraveling everything. How do you explain that you paint because once, years ago, Someone shattered you in a way that made you desperate to create beauty from the wreckage. Sometimes I'd see couples pass my studio window and I'd watch them, not in envy, but in curiosity. There was a time when I thought love was supposed to feel like certainty. That when you met the right person, everything would click and stay that way. But love, I learned, is far messier than that. It changes. It grows unevenly. It requires forgiveness in small, ordinary ways every single day. Daniel reached out once more, 2 years after that encounter outside the restaurant. It was a short message, a photo of an old painting I'd done for him, still hanging in what must have been his office. He wrote, "I still think about how you saw the world back then. Hope you're doing well." I stared at it for a long time, feeling neither warmth nor bitterness. Just distance. The kind of distance that comes from finally stepping out of the echo chamber of your own pain. I typed, I hope you are too, and pressed send. That was the last time I ever heard from him. That night, Adam came home late from a gallery event. I told him about the message. He just nodded, kissed the top of my head, and said, "You okay?" I told him yes, and I meant it. We sat on the couch, the city humming faintly through the open window. For a long while, we didn't talk. I could feel the weight of all the years between the woman I used to be and the one sitting there now. The girl who thought love was supposed to save her, and the woman who finally understood it was never supposed to. Time kept moving, as it does. My studio grew. Adam started teaching art at a local college. We got a cat named Olive, who refused to love us both equally. There were still hard days, the kind that remind you that healing isn't a straight line, that even peace comes with its own kind of ache. But I never once looked back and wished to undo what had happened. Because if I hadn't been broken, I wouldn't have learned how to build. One evening, years later, I found myself standing in front of one of my own paintings at an exhibit. It was huge, layered, chaotic, bursting with color. A woman beside me said softly, "It feels like freedom." I smiled. It is. When the lights dimmed and people started to leave, I stayed a while longer just looking. The blues were still there, faint, tucked into the corners, but surrounded now by yellows, pinks, golds. I realized then that I hadn't erased the pain. I'd just transformed it. Sometimes I still dream of Daniel, not as a lover or a ghost, but as a character in a story I once told myself about who I needed to be. In the dream, we're standing in the middle of a crowded street and he says, "You look happy." And I say, "I am." Then he fades into the background, swallowed by the noise, and I wake up. I'll make coffee, feed Olive, open the curtains, and the city will look new again. Because that's what healing really is, not forgetting, not replacing, not rewriting, but simply learning how to keep living after the storm. To keep loving, knowing full well how much it can hurt. And in that quiet, ordinary way, I found something that feels like peace. Not the kind you search for, but the kind that finds you when you've finally stopped running. When I turned 45, the world felt quieter, and in a strange, unsteady way, I finally felt like I belonged to it. It wasn't a dramatic realization, no grand moment of revelation, just a slow and almost imperceptible settling into myself. The noise that had filled my 20s and 30s, the what-ifs, the ache of lost love, the constant search for something that could finally make me feel whole, had softened into something steadier. I lived alone again by then, though not out of loneliness. Adam and I had grown in different directions, not because of betrayal or cruelty, but because sometimes love doesn't need to end in disaster for it to end. We'd both seen it coming for years. We had built something kind and real, but it had turned into companionship more than partnership. We divorced quietly, shared one last dinner together, and didn't speak much after that. He still sends me postcards, sometimes from cities he visits, sketches of church towers, a seaside cafe, an old bridge. He always signs them simply, "Take care of yourself." A. And I do. I have a small apartment with huge windows that look out over the city skyline. In the mornings, the light pours in and lands on my kitchen table, and it feels like forgiveness, warm and unassuming. My art has changed again. I paint fewer storms now, fewer broken bodies or blurred faces. These days, I paint light, not the kind that blinds or bursts, but the kind that lingers. The kind you only notice when everything else has gone still. Sometimes, in the evenings, I take long walks. The city has aged with me, new buildings where old ones used to be, coffee shops that have changed owners, the same worn cracks in the sidewalk I used to trip over when I was 27. And I'll pass people who remind me of who I was. The young woman clutching her phone, waiting for a text that won't come. The couple arguing softly at the bus stop, their voices trembling between anger and love. I want to stop and tell them that it all changes, not the pain itself, but the way you hold it. It gets lighter, I'd say, not because it hurts less, but because you learn it's not meant to anchor you anymore. Daniel exists now only as a fragment of memory. I haven't seen him in over a decade. Once I stumbled across a newspaper feature about the company he worked for, a photo of him smiling stiffly beside a board of directors. He looked older, of course, the same way I do. There were faint lines at the corners of his eyes, a weariness in his face that wasn't there before. I didn't feel anger or longing, just recognition, like running into a version of yourself you, long since outgrown. That night, I took out the last letter he ever wrote me, the one I'd kept folded in an old notebook for years. It wasn't dramatic, just simple. You were right about me. I was afraid of the quiet. I hope you found peace in it. I read it once, then tucked it back into the drawer and went to sleep. I dreamed of rain. Not the heavy, suffocating kind that used to come with heartbreak, but a soft drizzle, the kind that makes everything smell like new beginnings. When I wake up now, I no longer feel like I'm trying to rebuild myself from the ruins of someone else's choices. I've built something new, something entirely my own. I still have moments, of course. There are mornings when I catch my reflection and see the trace of that girl who once believed love had to be dramatic to be real, who confused chaos with passion, who thought losing someone meant losing herself. I look at her now, and I want to tell her that none of it was wasted. Every mistake, every wrong turn, every tearful night led her here, to a life that's imperfect but deeply, quietly hers. The world moves so fast, and yet healing always takes its time. It sneaks up on you. One day, you're still counting the days since someone left, and the next, you can't remember the last time you thought about them at all. That's the real miracle, the soft forgetting that isn't about erasing but about release. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the city lights flicker. Somewhere out there, people are falling in love, breaking each other's hearts, making promises they'll either keep or break. Somewhere, a version of me might still be crying into her pillow over someone who isn't coming back. And I wish I could reach out through time and tell her you'll survive it. You'll become someone new. You'll learn that love isn't about who stays. It's about who you become after they leave. In the end, life didn't give me the love story I thought I wanted. It gave me something quieter, something truer, a love that began the moment I stopped looking for it in someone else's eyes. I walk back to bed, pull the covers over myself, and close my eyes. There's no ache, no longing, just stillness. And in that stillness, I realize this is what peace feels like. Not an ending, not a beginning. Just me breathing, finally at home in my own heart.